Berlin, late 1943. Inside the grey-walled offices of German naval intelligence, analysts hunch over intercepted convoy reports. They update their Atlantic charts with fresh pins. Each pin marks a U-boat patrol zone. Each represents a hunter circling in cold, dark water. But something is wrong. New silhouettes keep appearing in reconnaissance photographs. Small warships, compact hulls. The same angular design, repeated dozens of times across different convoy routes. The intelligence reports identify their origin. Canadian. The analysts pause. They check their files. 4 years earlier, Canada possessed 6 ocean-capable destroyers. Its shipyards built fishing trawlers and Great Lakes freighters. It had no warship industry to speak of. It had no tradition of large-scale naval construction. No infrastructure for mass production. Now, Canadian escort vessels shadow nearly every convoy crossing the Atlantic. They screen merchant ships. They hunt submarines. They multiply faster than German torpedoes can sink them. The question takes shape. No file contains the answer. How does a nation of wheat farmers and cod fishermen produce warships so quickly? The explanation lies not in secret technology or a hidden fleet. It begins 3,000 miles west, in frozen shipyards, with workers who had never seen the ocean, and a crisis that demanded the impossible. How did this happen? And who made it possible? September 1939. Britain enters the war with a single, inescapable vulnerability. The island nation imports nearly everything. Food, fuel, raw materials for weapons. 55 million tons of cargo must cross the Atlantic each year just to keep Britain functioning. Without those shipments, factories fall silent. Without factories, there are no tanks, no aircraft, no ammunition. Without ammunition, there is no war. Germany understands this arithmetic perfectly. Within hours of the declaration of war, U-boats begin hunting. They strike alone at first, picking off stragglers and independent merchantmen. But by late 1940, Admiral Karl Dönitz has refined his tactics. Wolf packs, coordinated groups of submarines, now shadow convoys, gathering in the darkness before attacking simultaneously from multiple directions. The results are catastrophic. In October 1940, convoy SC-7 departs Nova Scotia, carrying supplies for Britain. 15 U-boats intercept it in the mid-Atlantic. Over 3 nights, 20 of 35 merchant ships sink beneath the waves. Thousands of tons of cargo, grain, steel, aircraft parts, settle into the cold, black depths. This pattern repeats, convoy after convoy. Winston Churchill later admits what he dared not say publicly during the war. The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. The arithmetic was unforgiving. If ships sink faster than they can be replaced, Britain starves. And by early 1941, they are sinking faster. Much faster. The crisis has a geography. A vast stretch of the mid-Atlantic lies beyond the range of Allied patrol aircraft. Sailors call it the Black Pit. Inside this gap, convoys travel blind, without air cover, for days at a time. U-boats circle freely, waiting for nightfall. Britain needs escorts. Hundreds of them. Warships fast enough to chase submarines, nimble enough to hunt them, numerous enough to close the gap. Britain cannot build them alone. Someone else must. If Britain could not build escorts fast enough, who could? Across the Atlantic, in Ottawa, military planners receive Britain's urgent request. The answer they must give seems absurd. Canada's navy barely exists. In September 1939, the Royal Canadian Navy possesses exactly 6 destroyers and a handful of smaller vessels. Its total personnel numbers fewer than 3,500 sailors. By comparison, the Royal Navy counts over 1,400 warships and nearly 200,000 men. The shipyards are worse. Canadian facilities build lake freighters, fishing trawlers, and coastal cargo vessels. No yard has produced a modern warship in decades. The tools, the expertise, the skilled labour, none of it exists for naval construction. And yet the request arrives anyway. Build escorts. Build anything that floats and fights. The British Admiralty offers a solution. A design exists, one created precisely for this kind of desperation. The Flower-class corvette. Based on the hull of a commercial whale catcher, the Flower-class trades elegance for practicality. At 205 feet long, with a shallow draft and simple steam propulsion, it can be assembled in small civilian yards using available materials. No specialized equipment required. No exotic alloys. No complex turbine systems. It is not a warship designed for glory. It is a warship designed to exist, quickly and in large numbers. Canadian shipyards receive the blueprints. Yards in Halifax, Montreal, Quebec City, and even landlocked ports along the Great Lakes begin clearing space. Workers who have never seen a naval vessel study diagrams of depth charge racks and anti-submarine detection gear. What follows defies every reasonable expectation. By 1943, at peak production, Canadian shipyards are launching a new naval vessel approximately every 4 days. Corvettes, frigates, minesweepers, hulls slide down the slipways in an unbroken industrial rhythm. A nation that could not build one warship in 1939 now builds them faster than Germany can train submarine crews. The question becomes inescapable. There had to be an explanation. There had to be an explanation. The shipyards did not fill themselves with experienced welders and riveters. Those workers did not exist in Canada, not in the numbers required. Canada built them from scratch. Prairie farmers who had never seen salt water travelled east to Halifax and Montreal. Schoolteachers set down chalk and picked up acetylene torches. Shop clerks learned to read hull schematics. Within months, tens of thousands of Canadians reinvented themselves as shipbuilders. Women entered the yards in unprecedented waves. They welded deck plates, operated cranes, and riveted hull sections. Work considered impossible for them only months before. In some facilities, women comprised nearly a third of the workforce. They earned the same burns and calluses as the men beside them. Shifts ran around the clock. 3 rotations, 24 hours, 7 days a week. Floodlights illuminated the slipways through frozen winter nights. Steam rose from coffee cups and cutting torches alike. And when the ships launched, sailors climbed aboard vessels still smelling of fresh paint and welding flux. Many crews received their corvettes with construction debris still scattered below decks. There was no time for finishing touches. The Atlantic did not wait. The builders and the sailors never met, but their fates were welded together in every hull plate and depth charge rack that left Canadian shores. But people alone did not win the Atlantic. The Flower-class corvette was not engineered for comfort. It was engineered for survival and rapid production. Its dimensions allowed construction in yards never meant for warships. The shallow draft meant Great Lakes shipyards, accessible only through canal locks, could build ocean-going escorts. Hull sections were prefabricated in workshops, then transported to slipways for final assembly. This modular approach slashed construction time dramatically, but the design carried brutal trade-offs. Corvettes rolled viciously in heavy seas. Veterans described motions so violent that men lashed themselves to stations to avoid being thrown across compartments. One sailor famously remarked that a corvette would roll in a heavy dew. Seasickness was constant. Sleep was rare. Hot food was a memory. Crews endured anyway. As production capacity grew, Canadian yards graduated to larger vessels. The River-class frigate offered improved range, better armament, and marginally less punishing seakeeping. Design refinements flowed continuously from operational experience, each batch incorporating lessons paid for in Atlantic crossings. The ships were never elegant, but they were present when it mattered. Behind the shipyard transformation stood one man with extraordinary authority, Clarence Decatur Howe, Minister of Munitions and Supply, operated with powers unprecedented in Canadian history. He could requisition factories, allocate raw materials, and authorize contracts worth millions without waiting for parliamentary approval. Critics called him the Minister of Everything. He accepted the title without apology. Howe's philosophy was simple. Build first, solve problems later. When blueprints arrived incomplete from Britain, he ordered construction to begin anyway. Engineers would finalize details while keels were already being laid. Delays were unacceptable. Bureaucracy was the enemy. Crown corporations bypassed peacetime contracting rules entirely. Private shipyards received guaranteed orders, eliminating financial risk. The entire system pivoted toward a single objective: hulls in the water, as fast as possible. German intelligence never adjusted to this reality. The Abwehr assessed Canada as a minor agricultural dominion, useful for grain shipments, irrelevant for war production. Analysts focused obsessively on American industrial capacity, tracking every Liberty ship launched from Kaiser's yards. Canadian output barely registered in their calculations. By the time German Naval Command recognized the scale of Canadian construction, the corvettes were already hunting their submarines. The miscalculation would prove fatal. Policy, production, and enemy miscalculation would collide in 1943. March 1943. The Battle of the Atlantic reaches its crisis. U-boat commanders transmit victory reports with mechanical regularity. Their torpedoes find targets night after night. The grey wolves have never been stronger. Over 400 operational submarines now patrol the shipping lanes. Dönitz deploys them in concentrations that overwhelm escort screens. In March, the ledger was brutal. Some 627,000 tons of Allied shipping lost, roughly 120 merchant vessels, and cargo for British factories sank into the sea. Aluminium, steel, petroleum and ammunition. It is the worst single month of the war for Allied shipping. Convoy HX-229 departs New York on March 8th, carrying fuel and military supplies. Convoy SC-122 sails from Halifax the same week. By terrible coincidence, their routes converge in the mid-Atlantic, directly in the path of 3 waiting wolf packs. What follows becomes the largest convoy battle in history. Over 4 days, submarines strike repeatedly. Torpedoes slam into tankers and freighters. Ships burn, break apart, and vanish. 22 vessels sink beneath the waves. The escorts fight back furiously, but they are simply outnumbered. The attackers melt into the darkness between assaults. In London, Admiralty officials face an unthinkable calculation. Losses now exceed new construction. The deficit compounds monthly. At this rate, Britain cannot sustain imports long enough to continue the war. Secret memoranda circulate discussing the suspension of convoy operations altogether. The system that keeps Britain alive may be abandoned. Across the Atlantic, German Naval Command studies the same figures. Admiral Dönitz permits himself cautious optimism. Victory in the tonnage war finally appears within reach. Neither side yet understands what is about to change. In Canadian ports, dozens of new escorts complete their final sea trials. Their crews are inexperienced, their equipment is unproven, but they exist, and they are sailing east. But what came in April changed the numbers and the war. April 1943. The convoys continue. The escorts multiply. Vessels constructed in Montreal, in Collingwood, in Kingston, cities hundreds of miles from the ocean, now join the mid-ocean escort force. Canadian warships assume responsibility for the Central Atlantic Gap, relieving British and American escorts for other duties. The reinforcements arrive just as new technology reaches operational units. Radar sets, improved and miniaturized, now detect surfaced submarines at distances that surprise German commanders. High-frequency direction-finding equipment, HF-DF, nicknamed Huff Duff, allows escorts to pinpoint U-boat radio transmissions within minutes. When a submarine reports a convoy sighting, escorts can now calculate its bearing and hunt it down. Tactics evolve in parallel. Escort groups finally contain enough vessels to detach hunters while maintaining defensive screens. Support groups roam the mid-Atlantic as mobile reinforcements, racing toward threatened convoys. The wolf packs find themselves stalked by their prey. May 1943 begins with U-boats still pressing attacks. But the mathematics have inverted. On May 4th, convoy ONS-5 fights through heavy fog and storm-tossed seas. 30 U-boats converge on its 42 merchant ships. The battle lasts 5 days. 13 cargo vessels sink, a grievous toll. But the escorts sink 6 submarines and damage several more. The exchange rate has shifted. Across the Atlantic, similar engagements unfold with identical results. Submarine losses mount with terrifying speed. By month's end, Dönitz reviews casualty reports with growing alarm. 41 U-boats destroyed in 31 days. Experienced crews gone. Irreplaceable commanders lost. The rate exceeds training capacity. On May 24th, he issues an order that would have seemed impossible 8 weeks earlier: withdraw from the North Atlantic. The Wolfpacks retreat to quieter waters. Convoy routes that witnessed slaughter now pass unmolested. Merchant ships reach Liverpool, Glasgow and Belfast with their cargoes intact. In Berlin, naval intelligence officers finally update their assessments of Canadian industrial output. The numbers they calculate seem implausible, but the corvettes hunting their submarines provide all the verification required. The realization comes precisely too late. Ships that existed only as blueprints in 1940 have broken the siege of Britain. The Atlantic lifeline holds, and the industrial might assembling in England can now cross the Channel. The road to Normandy begins on Canadian slipways. The convoys that reached Britain in 1943 carried more than food and fuel. They carried the accumulated weight of American industrial production: tanks, artillery pieces, trucks by the tens of thousands, ammunition measured in tonnage that strained the language of logistics. Every crate that crossed the Atlantic became a weapon pointed at occupied Europe. By June 1944, the build-up was complete. Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy, depended entirely on supplies stockpiled through secure Atlantic shipping. Canadian corvettes and frigates had helped guarantee that security. When Allied soldiers waded onto French beaches, they carried rifles assembled from components that survived the submarine gauntlet. The strategic consequences reshaped the war's trajectory. With the Atlantic secure, Allied planners could coordinate resources across theatres with confidence. The industrial capacity of North America flowed uninterrupted to European and Pacific fronts alike. Canada itself emerged transformed. Shipyards that had struggled to build fishing trawlers in 1939 now possessed expertise in naval architecture, precision welding, and industrial-scale project management. The workforce, trained under desperate pressure, carried those skills into peacetime. Post-war manufacturing boomed in facilities originally retooled for corvette production. An industrial foundation had been forged in the crucible of emergency. The Royal Canadian Navy underwent an even more dramatic metamorphosis. From 6 destroyers and 3,500 sailors in 1939, the Royal Canadian Navy expanded into one of the largest escort forces of the war, with over 400 vessels built in Canadian yards, 123 corvettes, 70 frigates, minesweepers, patrol craft, and auxiliary vessels of every description. Personnel swelled from a skeleton force to nearly 100,000 men and women in uniform. These figures belong together, spoken once, to capture the magnitude of what occurred. The cost stands alongside the achievement. Nearly 2,000 Royal Canadian Navy personnel died during the war. 24 Canadian warships sank beneath Atlantic waves. Merchant sailors, Canadian and Allied alike, perished by the thousands in waters their corvettes could not reach in time. Every statistic carries a name now carved in memorial stone. One ship remains. HNCS Sackville rests in Halifax Harbour today, the last surviving Flower-class corvette in the world. Its grey hull sits low in the water, preserved as a memorial to the escort sailors who served. Visitors walk its cramped decks. They stand in engine rooms barely large enough to turn around. They imagine weeks at sea in winter gales, hunting submarines that hunted them. The vessel has not fired its guns in 80 years, but it remembers. Wars are decided by factors that rarely appear in headlines. Commanders earn fame. Battles receive names. Individual acts of heroism become legend. But the quieter machinery of victory, the factories, the supply chains, the anonymous workers riveting steel plates at midnight, seldom enters collective memory. Canada's contribution to the Atlantic War belongs to this hidden history. No single engagement carries the weight of Midway or Stalingrad. No corvette captain became a household name. The shipyard workers who built the fleet returned to peacetime occupations without parades or monuments. Their accomplishment dissolved into the normalcy of victory. Yet that contribution altered the war's fundamental arithmetic. a nation underestimated by its enemies, dismissed as a supplier of grain and timber, produced the vessels that closed the Atlantic Gap. Farmers' sons became sailors, school teachers became welders, impossible production targets became routine, and in the grey waters of the mid-Atlantic, submarines that had hunted freely began to die. The German intelligence officers in Berlin eventually understood what had happened. Their charts and files documented the failure of their own assumptions. A dominion they had ignored had built a navy beneath their attention, but comprehension arrived only after the outcome was determined. In Halifax harbour, HMCS Sackville rides gently at anchor. Fog sometimes drifts across the waterfront at dawn, softening the edges of the old corvette's silhouette. The ship appears almost insubstantial in that light, a ghost from a conflict now passing from living memory. The harbour is quiet. The slipways that once rang with hammers and welding sparks stand silent. The convoys no longer form, but the sea remembers what crossed it, and the steel remembers what it was built to protect. The camera holds on the grey hull, motionless against the morning mist. Then, slowly, it pulls away. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please consider liking this video. It helps Canadian Legacy share more forgotten chapters of the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one mattered. Each one shaped the world we live in. And we'd love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Our community spans continents, from veterans to historians, from classrooms to living rooms. Thank you for watching, and thank you for helping keep these stories alive.